It's getting to be time to figure out what we're going to do with putting an engine into this old truck here. And so we're going to take a look at some small block Dodge engines and try and have some discussions and some explanations into what we're doing and why we're doing it. A good start will be to get some reference material on what you're working with and information on how to rebuild the engine. So you can find that online. You can get a manual like this, and that's a good starting point. In my case, we're dealing with the small block Dodge engine, which would be the 318 or the 5.2 liter, or a 360, which is classified as a 5.9 liter. So this here was the engine that came out of the truck, which is a 318 LA engine. It's the older style engine. And then beside that, we have the Magnum engine, and that would have been from 1992 to 2003. And the difference, one of the big differences between the Magnum engine and the LA engine would be the valve train. So in this case here, with the Magnum engine, we've got the roller lifters here, and we've got this little saddle that they ride in, and then this, they call it kind of like a spider, which will hold that saddle in, and the saddle goes and holds the lifter so that it doesn't rotate, and then the roller will roll on the lobe of the cam. And then that's gonna come up here to individual rockers. This is what those individual rockers look like on the Magnum engine. So each one is individually bolted down on a pedestal down here. And if you were to upgrade, you could get where you could individually adjust each one of these. On the LA engine here, we have a shaft that goes through here, and all of our rockers are mounted on this shaft. And there's a valley in here that comes off of where the camshaft bearing is, and it'll come up and it'll go through the head. And if we look on this side, might be a better illustration. It'll come up through this tube here, up through the head, and then it'll come into the shaft, and that's the lubrication system that's lubricating all of the valve train on this older design. These are just solid lifters. There's no rollers like in the Magnum there. And that is the big difference between the Magnum engine and the LA engine. With the Magnum engine now, it's not lubricated that way because we have individual rockers here. So each individual rocker needs to be oiled, and that is oiled through the push rod that comes up through the roller lifter, and it is lubricated through that hole that comes up and into the rocker, each individual one. So the heads are the big difference between the LA engine over on the left side and the Magnum engine on the right side. Other than that, pretty much identical when it comes to bore and stroke and the rest of the components of the engine. We do have other subtle differences, such as the exhaust manifold on the Magnum versus the exhaust manifold on the LA engine, and obviously too with our front hardware with the V-belt and how everything is attached on the front of the engine here, with our water pump, our alternator, stuff like that. And when they switched it over to the Magnum, it's a different water pump that goes on there. It's a serpentine belt. There's a huge bracket that holds the air conditioning and the alternator all together on the front of the engine. So, but if you were to look at the block should be pretty much the same for bore and stroke and the crankshaft and rods, bearings, camshaft bearings, all that stuff. So the first thing, I suppose, is to identify your engine and what you're working with here. So again, this is the older LA engine, and this is the Magnum engine. Now, how do you tell if it's a 318 or a 360? We have to look down on the side of the block, which is opposite where the oil filter is. And if you look there, you'll see the 318 stamped into the side of the block. And then you'll do that for each one of the engines. And here we should see a 360. And on this one here, we've got a 318. And then again on the end, we have another 360. So as we look at the engines here, we've got an LA 360, a Magnum 318, a Magnum 360, and an LA 318. So the 318 is 318 cubic inches, or in the way of a Magnum engine, it is 5.2 liter. So I've got some numbers, and they may vary from research and depending on where you're getting your information, but the numbers that I've got is a 318 is about 234 horsepower at 4,100 RPM and 295 foot-pounds of torque at 3,000 RPM. And the 360 is 245 horsepower at 4,000 RPM and 345 foot-pounds of torque at 3,250 RPM. Both of these engines share a 9.1 to 1 compression ratio. And I guess I should add that this information is basically for the Magnum engines. I think that on the LA engines, there were several different compression ratios that you could have gotten throughout the years. So the 318 is 3.91 inches for the bore and 3.31 inches for the stroke. And the 360 is 4 inches for the bore and 3.58 inches for the stroke. So now that we have a little review on the engines, I guess we need to make some clear decisions on what we're going to do. And that would be, are we going to choose the older LA engine or the newer Magnum engine? The Magnum engine was a fuel injected engine and the LA engine was a carbureted engine. I'm choosing to go with a Magnum engine because I want to take advantage of this roller valve train, the roller rockers and the valve train. And another point of interest is that you don't need to break in a camshaft with the Magnum engine because of the roller lifters and stuff. Whereas with the LA engine, you need to be careful and make sure that you have a very good break-in procedure there after your rebuild. So now that I've chosen the era of engine that I'm going to use, which is the Magnum, is it going to be the 318 or is it going to be the 360? I'm choosing the 318. That was the 318 that came out of the truck, so I'm just going to replace it with a Magnum. And so I bought this core engine over here, which is a Magnum 318. We're going to rebuild that, put that into the truck. If you were going to switch from a 318 to a 360 or vice versa, we're staying with the same platform, but I'm going to explain that change anyway. The big difference between these two engines is internally balanced or externally balanced. Some of the identifiers between the two engines, apart from checking the casting on the side of the block, would be the harmonic balancer. This is on the 318, and as we turn it around, we see it's pretty consistent and true all the way around on the harmonic balancer. If we go over to the 360, we are going to notice this recess down in here.